I'm sure when you imagine Harley-Davidson, you tend to think of big dudes lacking helmets, the Sturgis show, wearing leathers on big, burly, grumbly American cruisers. I'm gonna be honest, I only found out about this bike's existence while I was researching the bike list of Ride 4. But after this video, you might agree with me in saying that's not the only thing they deserve to be recognized for. In the 1990s, Harley decided to go racing, and despite generally failing in a competitive sense, in doing so they created one of the best stories in modern motorcycle history next to the infamous Japanese speed wars of the same period. This is the somewhat untold story of the 1993 Harley-Davidson VR1000, when Harley went circuit racing.
An infrared transmitter opens the door and permits contact.
The 1990s were the peak of motorcycle racing. Some even refer to it as the golden age. So, naturally, even Harley decided to capitalize, which meant building, of course, a full-on racing bike. They decided to go the route of a big V-twin, as it was essentially their home turf when it came to engine design. Now let me explain that this technically wasn't Harley's first venture onto the track, as they already had some experience in flat-track racing. The stalwart XR750 was the bike to beat in Grand National flat-track races around the country. But now, needing a brand new bike to compete in AMA racing against established competitors from around the world, suddenly Harley was put in the unfamiliar position of underdog. The VR1000 was meant to be entered in AMA racing, seeing as it was one of the most popular forms of two-wheeled motorsports over here in the United States. It was expected to start running in 1991. Keyword, unfortunately, being expected. It didn't race in 1991. Or 1992. Or 93. Development delays and the such prevented it from hitting a circuit until 1994. Nonetheless, the VR1000 was meant to be a more modern replacement for the failure that was the XR platform. Utilizing things like liquid cooling, overhead camshafts, and other seemingly space-age tech in the eyes of the good old boys at Harley. It was aimed to dethrone the Ducati Decimo Quattro, which had ruled AMA racing at that time. The Harley had been upgraded to 998cc from the predecessor, which had a 749cc motor. The engine was developed by Roush, the suspension by Penske, and the brakes by Willwood. It was meant to be a full-force, star-spangled American racing bike. The fact that it never hit a circuit until 1994 meant that, unfortunately, by then it was well behind the curve. But it wasn't all bad, as the VR1000 was a rocket accelerating out of turns, as the bigger V-twins generally were. Unfortunately, it was never actually able to beat the trap speeds of the quote-unquote obsolete and outdated Lucifer's Hammer XR1000, which was also in the running for the best name ever, a total of 10 years earlier. Intent to make some sort of money on the project after its unfortunate racing performance, they did the general thing when it comes to unsuccessful racing machines. Chuck on some lights, mirrors, and turn signals. Unfortunately, that was good enough for Poland and not much else, meaning that the most track-focused bike from an American manufacturer ever wasn't actually able to be sold in its motherland. Despite that, if you lived in one of the countries where it was legal, for the low price of $49,490, or roughly $90,000 in 2021's currency, you could own one of 50 of these racing bikes. With 135 horsepower and weighing only 400 pounds, it could still most likely beat that teenager on his Yamaha R6 around a track even today. And it better for that price tag. Remarkably, Harley actually kept marketing the VR1000, until eventually in the early aughts, they pulled the plug on the motorsports division altogether. While I'll continue to not really be a fan of Harleys for the most part, this is a somewhat sad story of a virtuous attempt, and some would say an inevitable failure. And sadly, Harley hasn't returned to the sport since.